Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Bishop's Gambit by McKenna, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, New York City, Summer of 1955. The door to Mr. Jessup's office sprang open, and he stood to one side as though allowing something to pass. I didn't even have time to lift an eyebrow before a small, colorful bird flew past him, making a beeline for my desk. It landed on the rim of my jar of pencils, the resulting crash tipping the holder over and scattering the contents across my work area. Since Mr. J's office didn't have windows, there was only one place the bird could have originated, from the hidden passage to the hidden laboratories below. Unfazed, the bright little bird righted itself and hopped a few strides in my direction, giving an occasional chirp. Close up, I saw the bird wasn't alive, but some fantastical toy made of metal. Individual feathers were layered in black and gold to approximate the real thing, and the overall result was so lifelike, most people wouldn't give it a second glance. A bold red band held a minuscule note to its metal leg. I looked up to see both Mr. J and Miss Clemson watching me. Mr. J's jowly features had the befuddled look of an old basset hound, along with a benign and amused acceptance of the bizarre, or rather what passed for normal at Red Claw security. Miss Clemson's face was stiff with disapproval. She bore a marked resemblance to the headmistress of my old boarding school, where my father had shown up to take me out of class for one of his little jaunts, as he called them. I'd spent more time traveling the world with my father than I had in school, but as my grades had been exemplary, the headmistress could do no more than radiate disapprobation. I rather suspect now that the school president's love of Scotch and my father's connection to bootleggers had been a factor in my graduation, valedictorian or not. Needless to say, with her stern expression and her faded red hair escaping its messy bun, Miss Clemson looked as if she'd like to fail me as an employee, which was tiresome, as I was hardly the lowly receptionist I'd been when I first started working at the agency. I'd been a field agent now for nearly 2 months, even if part of that time had been spent on probation. "Miss Bishop!" Her admonition rang out with all the censure women in positions of authority held everywhere. I stifled a wince. It wasn't as though I had any control over what Peter Knight decided to do, including his methods for contacting me. I snatched up the fake bird. Though it wasn't real, the construct had been programmed to act like one, and it struggled as I clamped down on its wings and rustled the message free of the band. As it was impossible to hold onto the bird and unroll the note at the same time, I let go of the finch-like device and fixed a glare on it. "Don't go anywhere." The bird cocked its head at me and began pecking among the pencils. Miss Clemson stood with her fists on her hips, her one eyebrow raised. Though I would have dearly loved to stick my tongue out at her, I read the note instead. In tiny, cramped handwriting it said, "Lunch, Park, 12:30. I glanced at my watch. I had 15 minutes to spare. "A note from Dr. Knight, I presume?" Mr. J beamed at me, not at all fussed by the interruption to the workplace. "Yes, sir." I scribbled a hasty affirmation on the back side of the paper and chased the bird around my desktop so I could tuck the note back in the leg band. When I looked up, Miss Clemson pursed her lips. Since being on probation meant I was currently on desk duty, the two of us took turns manning the reception area during lunch breaks. "If you please, Miss Clemson, I'd like to go to lunch a bit early." Why the man can't use the intercom like a civilized person is beyond me. Miss Clemson's sniff contained volumes of censure. Now, Mr. J continued to smile benevolently. "I'm sure Dr. Knight is merely testing the equipment." "May I?" I held up the bird, directing my question to both of them. "Oh, very well." Miss Clemson gave in with poor grace. Mr. J merely stepped aside and waved toward his inner sanctum. While I supposed I could pick up the phone and dial Knight's station down in the labs, no doubt this was a test of the bird's ability to carry messages back and forth. When I released the bird, it darted into Mr. J's office and presumably back through the still open door to the labs below where Knight waited. A loud buzz emanated from Miss Clemson's phone, and a red light lit up on its base. She crossed the room to pick up the receiver. "Yes, sir." Of the two people most likely to use the intercom, one was standing in the room with us. That meant Miss Clemson was speaking with Riker, our enigmatic boss. Her gaze slewed in my direction as she listened, and her eyes narrowed. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." She replaced the receiver and gave me a thin smile. "Mr. Riker would like a word with you in his office before you take lunch." I nodded. Grabbing my notepad along with my ever-present clutch, I made my way down the corridor to Riker's office. The only good thing about the dark, forbidding passageway was that it was no longer as cold as a meat locker, the way it had been when I first began working at Red Claw this past winter. Now its very gloom prevented July's unbearable heat from touching the walls, until almost time to quit for the day. Pausing only to straighten my Navy sailor suit, I rapped on the door and waited for permission to enter. "Come in, Bishop." Riker stood behind his desk as I entered, both hands resting on the back of his chair. In my early days working for Red Claw, I'd wondered how my boss had his finger on the pulse of everything going on in the main office, despite rarely leaving his own office at the end of this gloomy corridor. Now that I knew he had closed-circuit cameras operating in various parts of the building, I no longer marveled at his mysterious knowledge. He might have lost his almost magical air of omnipotence, but he remained very much a mystery. I only knew a few of his secrets, such as his ability to change into a flaming phoenix. 5 months ago, I would have laughed out loud at the notion of shapeshifters or artifacts capable of almost magical powers, let alone work in a firm that dealt with both. The mere suggestion screamed of too much time reading the stories in Astounding Magazine or Ripley's Believe It or Not. But then I discovered the company I worked for wasn't your typical insurance agency, and my coworkers were something more than ordinary humans. After the initial jolt of shocked disbelief, I couldn't imagine working anywhere else. The average jobs available to women in the 1950s paled in comparison to the thrill of working for Red Claw Security. "Sit down, Bishop. I need a word with you." I took the chair opposite his desk and folded my hands over my notebook in my lap. My boss was a handsome man if you favored the elegant pirate look. With his dark hair brushed back from his brow and the neatly trimmed beard that framed his jaw, he could have passed for an 18th century sea captain or one of the Three Musketeers. Although I rarely saw Riker in anything other than a gray flannel suit, I could picture him in a cravat and waistcoat, brandy snifter in hand. The less said about the times I'd seen him in his birthday suit, however, the better. "I want to talk to you about the report you put together on that batch of unusual activity over the last few weeks up toward Poughkeepsie. One of those new-fangled subdivisions. What was it? Park Grove? Forest Hills?" "Forest Grove, sir." Beats me why they would cut down all the trees and name a housing development after them, but there you are. 5 reports of UFO sightings and 3 inexplicable phenomena. There was that sinkhole that swallowed a house, luckily no fatalities, and a case of spontaneous combustion, which needs to have a paranormal component proved or disproved. Then there was that little matter which, according to our resident eggheads, was the result of an EM pulse short-circuiting a wide variety of electrical and mechanical objects. That's a bit too coincidental for my comfort. As ever, Riker was a master of understatement, but I merely said, "Agreed, sir," as he lit a cigarette. He took an inordinate amount of time to take his first puff, savor the tobacco, and let out in a slow trail of smoke. It was so deliberate the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I suspected I wasn't going to like whatever he had in mind. Instinctively, I glanced at the magic 8-ball sitting on the corner of his desk. I had good reason to know this version was more than a child's toy. Had I been alone, I might have consulted it to see what Riker had in mind for me. "We need to investigate, but damn it, we're talking the suburbs here. The usual 2-man team won't do it. We need someone who looks the part. Are you up for it?" The tension that had been building ever since Riker lit a cigarette oozed out of my spine. I'd been on desk duty long enough after my impetuous handling of my first case, locating Peter Knight and persuading him to join Red Claw. While, for the most part, everything turned out all right in the end, some dangerous tech had gone missing and was now in the hands of one of Red Claw's toughest competitors, who happened to be my boss's half-brother. Ryan Sterling played by his own rules, and the jury was out on whether he was one of the good guys or bad guys. I'd been on probation ever since. "Yes, sir." Finally, if I had to play Betty Crocker to get back in the field, I would. "Don't be too quick to agree until you know all the details." Smoke wreathed Riker's head as he took his seat and fixed an assessing gaze upon me. "I suppose you're aware of the security changes we're making." "Yes, sir." I schooled my expression into one of neutral calmness. He tapped the ash from his cigarette several times on the tray sitting on the corner of his desk in an obvious bid for time to marshal his thoughts. Well, it was overdue. In the past, we relied on our cover story and minimal security, as anything else would have called undue attention to our activities. Given the recent security breaches, we've implemented stronger measures. That's been sufficient for the time being, but we're also outgrowing our offices. Diversifying our holdings into multiple facilities will prevent losses from any one location from being astronomical should another breach occur. Very wise, sir. The unease I'd felt before returned to coil like a snake in my belly. Why couldn't he come out with whatever plan he had in mind? Riker cleared his throat. We're spread thin at the moment, trying to cover all of New York, and I don't have the manpower to spare. I need a team to investigate these reports. He paused slightly before continuing. Knight has a gift for figuring out what this strange technology does. Ah, Knight wasn't an official agent, more of an expert consultant. You want me to work with Knight on this mission, undercover, in Forest Grove. A second later, the whole of Riker's plan dawned on me. My stomach sank as though it had been filled with lead. You want us to pose as a married couple? Something in my tone made Riker flick a sharp glance in my direction. You have a problem with this? You and Knight are both adults and professionals. Without waiting for my response, he flicked his fingers in a dismissive gesture. If you're concerned about your reputation, don't be. Your fellow agents are shapeshifters. If Red Claw can pretend it's a normal investigative agency, surely you and Knight can pretend you're married. The end of Riker's cigarette glowed as if it were the open door to a furnace as he took a deep drag. Since we're hiding from the rest of the world, the fact that shifters exist, a couple of agents pretending to be married, is a much lesser offense against society. Something inside my clutch lurched, and I clamped my hands down over my bag. The little ray gun within had attached itself to me the first time I picked it up, and now it traveled with me wherever I went. Though, to be fair, I agreed with my strange weapon's proposed action. Shooting my boss might be frowned upon, even on the stun setting. Since Riker was indeed my boss, I managed to speak without grinding my teeth. Given that the operation is undercover, obviously my reputation won't be at risk because no one outside of Red Claw will know about the mission, but I question how Knight will react to this plan. After all, until recently he thought he was a widower. Less than 2 months ago, he discovered not only had his wife faked her death, but that she'd never loved him in the first place. I'm not sure how he will accept the assignment. The evening Knight had discovered Margot's duplicity was the night he'd almost walked away from Red Claw entirely. I felt certain I didn't need to point that out to Riker. The end of his cigarette glowed as he took another deliberate drag. Actually, it was his idea. I couldn't keep the outraged incredulity out of my voice. Knight suggested the two of us pretend to be married? Riker lifted his immaculate shoulders in a little shrug. Yes, but if you aren't interested... Pinching the bridge of my nose, I forced myself to take a deep breath. Wasn't a field assignment what I wanted after all? This was my chance to redeem myself with Riker. I didn't say that. I need to think about it, however. I snatched up the 8-ball and returned it over. The window into the ball appeared blank for a moment, and then a triangle slowly rolled to the surface of the liquid within. It read, "The odds are in your favor." I clapped the 8-ball back on Riker's desk without comment and ignored his knowing grin. Pretending not to notice my reaction, Riker ground out his cigarette. Take the weekend to decide. If you aren't willing to undertake this proposal, I understand, but I will need to place agents on site as soon as possible. The irony of Riker's use of the word proposal was lost on him. I took my leave without pointing out this little detail. I had a lunch meeting to attend and a snarky scientist to slap.